Hi everyone, today we'll be looking at two different denoising programs, DXO PureRaw and Topaz Denoise AI, and pitting them up against each other. Now, yesterday I did a review on the DXO PureRaw and I was very impressed by its performance and how much it cleaned up the images. And I got a lot of great feedback from all of you, I appreciate that. But some of the questions were, can I compare it to Topaz Denoise AI? So I've downloaded the Topaz Denoise AI, and we've been comparing the results from both these programs side by side. And just for reference, I'm using PureRaw version 1.1 and Topaz Denoise version 3.1.1. Now I'll be using a lot of the same images that I used in my DXO PureRaw review, but this time we'll be processing them with Topaz Denoise AI, and then we can do a side-by-side comparison. So let's just start with a baseline photo, meaning one that I took at base ISO 200 on my EM1 Mark III, and compare that against a straight out of camera ISO 6400 image. So here we have on the left the ISO 200 and on the right the ISO 6400. And as you can see, the ISO 6400 has plenty of color noise, some luminance noise, etc. And if we look in this corner here, you can see here in the negative space, the lots of color noise and some loss of detail as well. Now let's see how DXO PureRaw did with this image. All right, on the left we have the straight out of camera raw image, and then on the right we have the DXO PureRaw processed image. And you can see how nicely that cleaned up on the color card here. And if we go over to my Pentax camera, we can see again how nicely it cleaned up the camera, even in the shadow and dark areas. And specifically, I want you to look at this screw here on the body. It's just a little tiny Phillips screw, and you can see over here with PureRaw, it cleaned it up pretty nicely. And then over here, you can see the 4/3 logo still has some color here, and then when DXO PureRaw processed it, we still have some good color here. And then you can also see the little LED light or whatever this is, it's still got sort of a red tint to it. And then finally in the negative space and shadow area, you can see how nicely DXO PureRaw cleaned this up with no noise and retained all of the detail. And again, I'm always very impressed about how it can sharpen details without creating artifacts in sort of the negative space or smoother areas, while still cleaning up all of the noise. Now let's compare DXO PureRaw against Topaz Denoise. All right, now it should be pretty obvious I'm using the trial version of Topaz Denoise AI because Topaz adds a watermark to the image, as you can see here on the right. But let's go ahead and punch in onto the color card into an area where the watermark is not affecting it. And you can see down here in the bottom left corner of the color card that I think, yeah, DXO PureRaw did a better job at cleaning up the noise and still retaining all of the detail. And then if we look at the Pen F here, inside the barrel, all of the color noise is gone. You can read the text on the lens barrel. Whereas on the Topaz Denoise, there's still some blue color noise and still a little bit soft here. So it didn't do any over sharpening at all. And really that's probably just about the right amount of sharpening, because my general feeling is DXO PureRaw over sharpens just slightly, a little bit too much for my taste, but overall it's doing the better job with the noise in the image. Now let's go over to this corner, and yeah, DXO PureRaw looks really good, and Topaz Denoise, not bad. But look at the color noise back here in the negative space. Now just for reference, I was using the Topaz Denoise standard noise reduction. So I wasn't happy with this result, so I tried another setting called low light. So let's look at the low light noise reduction with Topaz Denoise. So as you can see, it's doing a much better job now at reducing the color noise in the image. But let's see how it did with the details and everything else. And not bad, I think. Again, it didn't over sharpen it, but the contrast is a little bit low, in my opinion. Nothing that can't be fixed up easily with a little touch of post-processing. And then let's go to the color chart. And yeah, much better job. But the details here are very, very soft. I don't think that really can be recovered in post-processing. Then let's go over to the lens barrel. And again, I'm seeing some color noise here in the Topaz. And then if we go over here, we look at the lens barrel. It's a little soft here with the lettering. And yeah, but I think in this case, the results, even though when we pixel peep at 200%, the results are close enough that I probably wouldn't choose one over the other. I just base my decision on price over whichever one was cheaper to buy. I would buy that one. And I think right now Topaz Denoise AI is a little cheaper. However, you know, we can't look at just one image for comparison to make our decision, right? So let's look at some other images. All right, here's the same scene at ISO 25,600, and I have DXO PureRaw on the right. Let's go ahead and punch into the color card. And as you can see, it really, again, did an amazing job at cleaning up the noise without destroying the details. Because I can still read all of the letters and numbers here. I can almost make out, actually I can make out the serial number here on the color card. And if we go into the Pen F here, you can see it cleaned up nicely, the color noise and luminance noise here without killing the detail too much. But yeah, the rim here that normally says 37 millimeters is totally smudged. But you can tell there's some lettering there. And then if we go up into the corner here to the color mode dial, you can see that it says color. And, or I'm sorry, this says mono here. And there's still good detail in the knurling here on the dials. And then one last check here at the negative space. And yeah, it cleaned up that noise very, very nicely. And again, I'm at 200% here. And it cleaned up all of this noise without creating too much in terms of like sharpening artifacts and things like that. Now let's compare DXO PureRaw against Topaz Denoise AI. All right, now I have the DXO PureRaw on the left, and I have Topaz Denoise on the right. And on this image, I use the severe high ISO noise setting, you know, on automatic with Topaz Denoise AI. And right away, you can tell there's a substantial difference in the quality. So let's go over here to an area where there's no watermark. And even under the severe setting, the Topaz Denoise did not do as good a job at cleaning up the color noise, nor retain the detail, in my opinion. Because you can see over here, it's definitely this 37 millimeter writing here is totally smudged out. But over here on the DXO PureRaw, you can see, if I tell you it says 37 millimeters, you might be able to see that, right? You'll be like, oh yeah, I can see that. That's 37. Even though it's not obvious. If I didn't tell you what the letters were or the numbers were, you probably would have a hard time. But and again, we can see that it says mono here. And then over here, yeah, it's totally smudged out. Now I may be able to do a little bit of sharpening on this image, but the problem is there's so much color noise everywhere that we would start to get a lot of artifacts. Let's go over here to the negative space. And again, yeah, it just did not do as good a job at cleaning up this color noise. And I mean, I like that it doesn't over sharpen. because again, DXO PureRaw looks slightly over sharpened to me when you punch in this close. But what I'm not happy about is all of this color noise. And one last place to look here, this is always a trouble spot, is where it's a kind of a dark, shadowy area. And, you know, my little Phillips screw here in the body is gone. There's very little delineation between the lens and the body. I mean, they kind of look like they're blended together. And on the Topaz AI, yeah, there's just color noise everywhere. So basically, I think at ISO 6400, some people might prefer the Topaz Denoise because it doesn't over sharpen the image. And you can just add a little bit of sharpening in post and you'll be okay, if you want to. But at ISO 25600, there was definitely the DXO Prime or DXO PureRaw with D Prime did a much better job, clearly. One other thing that I didn't mention was that there was definitely a strong color shift in the Topaz Denoise AI that I could not correct for, but I was able to correct for using the DXO Prime, D Prime. So at this point, I think I'd still lean towards DXO PureRaw, particularly because of the better performance at high ISO. But let's take a look at some real-life images. Now on the left here, I have the original raw image from my EM10 Mark II at ISO 16000. And on the right, I have the image processed using DXO PureRaw. And again, I tried to focus on the eye, and it's really amazing what DXO PureRaw did here. It doesn't look over sharpened now because this is sort of a natural image. And you can see the textures right here in her eye. And then as we go down on her nose, you know, the recovery it did of all the details of the fine hairs and her little blanket or pillow here is pretty amazing. And then also I'd like to note how it did with the background. It's very, very smooth. It's not an easy thing to do manually to sharpen details like this software did on the nose and the eyes, and not create artifacts in the background with the negative space and the smooth areas. And this is where I'm most impressed actually with the DXO PureRaw. So let's see how Topaz Denoise did. Okay, I have the DXO PureRaw on the left and Topaz Denoise on the right, as you can see with the watermark. And let's go ahead and punch in on the eye. Thankfully, the watermark didn't cover that. And I used the Topaz Denoise severe setting on auto here. And again, you can see that actually there is still some texture here. And it did a good job of removing a lot of the color noise, but there's still a little bit here. This area right in here has a little bit of magenta in it and kind of around there. And let's go down. And yeah, this is just nowhere near as good, I think, at ISO 16000. Let's look at the negative space or the background area. And I think they both did a good job here. Although there's still a little bit, some blotchiness here that it may be hard to see on YouTube, but the DXO PureRaw did a better job at smoothing out the background here. And I think it did a much better job sharpening. And again, on this image, to me, it doesn't look over sharpened. It looks just right. And now Topaz Denoise looks like it could use a little more sharpening. And again, if I try to sharpen this, let me just show you. I'll try and sharpen this a little bit in post. Right here. I can sharpen this and it's looking better. And then let me mask it out so I don't mess up the bokeh. Like I said, this area here, I think right about there is good. Let's compare it now. So again, on the left here, I have the DXO PureRaw. So even if I apply a little bit of sharpening in post, I still think the DXO PureRaw looks a lot better. And when we go to the background area, yeah, I masked it so it didn't affect here. But there you have it. I think DXO PureRaw won again here. Let's look at another image. This time I have an ISO 25600 on my EM10 Mark II, and that's the straight out of camera RAW on the left, and then on the right I have the DXO PureRaw processed image. And let's just punch in here to the center, and you can see that, again, the PureRaw did an excellent job at cleaning up all of the noise, retaining a lot of the detail. Just amazing. Like, look at the tire here. You can see the tread pattern has come back in most of it. And yeah, the brickwork looks good. Everything is pretty clean. Now let's compare it with how Topaz Denoise AI did. All right, on the left, I have the DXO PureRaw. On the right, I have the Topaz Denoise AI, same image, 25,000. And if we go to the center here, and I'd say this time, again, I think DXO did a better job with these high ISO images. Like if you look at this brick here, you can see the scarring right in here. And then over here, the scarring is just almost completely washed out, and it's very hard to see. And if we go down to the bicycle, what I noticed is this very bright orange bicycle, this orange is kind of faded, but also it's bleeding out over beyond the bicycle itself. Like look at this, this black bar here compared to the black bar here. So it eliminated all of the color noise, you know, that you normally get with high ISO images. But in doing so, it also smeared some of the colors into the rest of the image. So I think, again, clearly DXO PureRaw did an excellent job. And then looking at the tread on the tire, it's very distinct here at the top before it kind of gets lost in the mud down here. But on the Denoise AI, yeah, there's very little tread pattern to pick up here. All right, so I wanted to show you another image at base ISO 200 and how it looks when it's processed with DXO PureRaw. Because, you know, I got a few comments from some of you that you say, well, I never shoot over ISO 800 anyways, so I probably don't really need this. And I would agree with that on its face. Like, yeah, if you're shooting at ISO 800 or lower, a little post-processing and you'll be fine. But even at base ISO 200, DXO PureRaw gives you some advantages, especially here in the shadow areas. So let's punch in, and I'm at 200%, but you can see the raw image here on the left has plenty of noise here in the shadow area. Even in the lighter areas of the image, you can see there's noise here in the glass, whereas PureRaw cleaned all of that up without losing any of the detail. And in this case, again, it doesn't look over sharpened to me at all. Even when we go into the sky, look at the noise in the sky and look how it cleaned up really nicely using DXO PureRaw. And then one other thing I want you to notice is that I'm using Lightroom, and Lightroom applies its own optical corrections for whatever lens and camera combination we're using. But DXO has its own database for camera lens combinations. And if you look closely, you'll notice that it's actually framed a little bit wider on the PureRaw side, especially right down here. Notice this little speaker right here is in the frame, whereas the Lightroom version, it's been cropped out. So I don't know which one's more accurate, because I would need a different test chart to do that, but I think it was an interesting point to make, because look at the door here. The corner of this door has just made it into the frame, whereas on the Lightroom version, it got cropped off. Now let's look at Topaz Denoise and see how it did. So again, PureRaw on the left and Topaz Denoise AI on the right. And it looks like Topaz Denoise did not do any optical corrections. It just used the same corrections that Lightroom found. And if we punch into the roof line here, while Topaz Denoise AI did reduce some of the noise, I still think DXO did a better job without over sharpening, in my opinion. I think that looks really good. How about up in the sky here? Yeah, it cleaned up the sky better. It's less grain. And let me check out the bell. Yeah, it looks good. And I use the Topaz Denoise standard here for this processing setting. So I think clearly for me, for the cameras and lenses that I use and the images that I take, the DXO PureRaw was a clear winner. And I ended up buying actually the PhotoLab 4 Elite, which includes the deep prime noise processing. Because the problem I had with the Topaz Denoise AI was the way it was kind of smearing colors at the higher ISOs. Like, remember the bicycle with the orange paint kind of bleeding off into the brick? That's very hard to fix in post-processing. So the best thing to do is, I have my affiliate links down below, but download the free trials for each of these software and see if they work with your images and cameras and lenses. Because one of the disadvantages to DXO PureRaw is it doesn't work with Fujifilm files, and it only works with raw images. Whereas Topaz Denoise did work with my Fujifilm X-T30 raw images, and it does work with JPEGs. So that may be a deal breaker for a lot of people thinking about DXO PureRaw, and you might want to consider Topaz Denoise AI. But either way, I appreciate you guys watching. That's all I have for today. And if you like these kind of videos, consider subscribing, maybe hit the like button. But either way, hopefully we'll see you again soon.